Good morning, colleagues and teachers. Today, I'll be presenting a long case. It's an abdominal case, GI case, abdominal lump. So, 50-year-old Hindu married lady, resident of Vashi, presented to TMH with chief complaints of right-sided abdominal pain and swelling for 5 months, 3 to 4 kg weight loss over the last 5 months, high-colored urine and yellowish discoloration of sclera, and generalized itching over the skin since the last 15 days. Patient was apparently all right 5 months ago when she complained of right-sided abdominal pain below her ribcage. Pain was dull, aching, and pricking in nature, which increased after the meals, coughing, and while straining for stool. Pain gradually increased in intensity, but never needed regular analgesics to relieve the pain. Pain was accompanied by a noticeable swelling in the right hypochondriac region and was associated with mild dyspepsia, nausea, mild decreased appetite, and a 3 to 4 kg weight loss over a 5-month period. There was no associated fever, vomiting, diarrhea, constipation, blood in vomitus, or black colored stools. Patient's relatives noticed yellowish discoloration of the patient's sclera, while the patient complained of passing dark yellow colored urine and having generalized itching all over the body in the last 15 days. There was no past history of jaundice, blood transfusions, or use of alternative medicines during this period. Patient does not have any significant past medical or surgical history or any comorbidities or addictions. There was a history of right ear surgery for persistent fluid discharge 3 years ago with resultant mild hearing loss. There is no family history of malignancy, no history of TB or TB contacts. Patient is a vegetarian and has normal bowel bladder habits. She has 4 children by normal vaginal delivery and no history of any abortions in the past. So to summarize, my patient is a 50-year-old Hindu married lady with no comorbidities or any significant past medical or surgical history who presented to TMH with complaints of right-sided abdominal pain associated with swelling and a history of weight loss for 5 months and jaundice in the last 15 days. So the differentials in my patient would be malignant causes. First would be cancer of the gallbladder. It could be large hepatic metastasis or a primary hepatocellular carcinoma. It could be locally advanced tumors of the hepatic flexure which present with a mass and swelling. Metastatic cancers which present with abdominal lymphadenopathy as a cause for the jaundice. And lastly, I would like to keep as cholangiocarcinoma. Amongst the non-malignant causes, only tuberculosis and hepatic abscess could have such a presentation.
Okay. Minute, that's good. Madam, are you there? Jai ma'am?
Yes,
Yeah.
I'm there.
Ma'am, so his presentation till the differentials in the exam point of view, is that what you would expect? I mean, would you
Yeah,
like to add, subtract anything?
No, subtract meaning I would want to ask, you stressed a lot about her being a vegetarian. So does that have any impact in your differential diagnosis or treatment or management? I mean, I know we can have some of the worms which are there, which could cause,
Minute, can you go back to your earlier slide where you mentioned?
So because each thing that you should say has to have a meaning. So then I would say like, okay, how, which cancers are predisposed by, say, do you have any correlation with any of the cancers, GI cancers and diet?
Yes, ma'am. Like diet is more predominant, like in colon cancers or cancers of the large bowel. But then, just as to complete the history, as
minute, the point Madam is trying to make, I think, is that if there is no major relevance, don't say it. Am I right, ma'am?
Yeah. So, and also specifically, like, you mentioned that she's a Hindu married lady, so I don't think that has a relevance to the current, I mean, so some things are prevalent in, say if you're thinking of a penile cancer, then yes, that becomes relevant. But, but in this patient, I don't think that is relevant. So just say what is relevant rather than,
Yes.
So
Anything else in the history, ma'am, that you'd like him to change?
No, not really. I think, yeah.
So yeah, I think Minute, just note down what Madam has said. Otherwise, I thought the flow was pretty good. You covered, I mean, the way you've taken the history, you've said ki it's only right upper quadrant and you've limited the, further, evaluation to that only. Great. Can you go back to your differentials, please?
Yes.
Okay, right. Can you go to the physical exam? Post
Yes,
the
sir.
physical exam, we'll come to your DD again. Yeah.
Okay. I not.
Just the physical exam. Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Do I start, sir?
Yeah.
On examination, patient is conscious, oriented, averagely built and nourished, and had an ECOG performance status of 1. Vital examinations were normal, pulse of 92 per minute, BP of 110/70, respiratory rate of 20 per minute, and an SpO2 of 97%. Icterus was present, few scratch marks were seen over the skin, but there was no pallor, edema, or lymphadenopathy. There were no other signs of liver cell failure and no icterus, and no flaps. The BMI of the patient was 22 and BSA of 1.55. Systemic examination was done bedside in the presence of a female nursing staff. The oral cavity was normal. On the abdominal examination on inspection, a localized globular swelling in the right hypochondrium was seen. There was no generalized abdominal distension. The umbilicus was central and inverted, and no dilated veins or scars. The findings of inspection were confirmed on palpation, and there was a vaguely defined mass in the right hypochondrium, approximately 5 to 4 centimeters. The upper border could not be felt separate. Could not be felt. It was moving with respiration, mild tenderness on palpation. Liver borders were not felt separately, and there was a dull note over the mass. No splenomegaly, and the rest of the abdomen was soft with a tympanic node. No shifting dullness was seen on felt on percussion. Other system examination, including breast and PV examination, were normal. So to
Okay.
conclude,
Hang on.
yes,
I'll go back to madam again. Ma'am, anything in the examination? To me, in a abdominal case, unless, I mean, do you need to do a PV exam in this lady? Ma'am, is one thing. Do we do it?
I mean, for this patient, she had an abdominal. This is a right hypochondrial lump, so that is, I think, definitely a breast examination, because I don't know, say,
Yes.
it could be a meds from the breast.
Sure.
Pelvic examination, yes, ideally, yes, but if the patient refuses, then that is okay. But I mean, just for the sake of completion, I think, yes, I mean, if you see some POD masses or things like that.
Okay. Anything else that you would want to know in the exam, ma'am? Something that he's missed or extra?
Did he mention, my attention deficit, did I miss out whether he mentioned specifically supraclavicular nodes and other things?
He said lymphadenopathy.
So but I think you need to maybe stress out whether there were any supraclavicular lymph nodes or not. Yeah.
Yes.
Medonc exam, I think supraclav, whether you find or not, please examine it, because most people would ask for that, right? Okay. I agree with that. And the PV exam, just note down madam's point that to say it or not say it solely based on your case, right? Otherwise, to me, the other thing is this averagely built, say the BMI and leave it at that. And if then they want to go into it, Arish, she's so thin, she's not so thin, say that. Or else they'll ask you what's averagely built and thinly built. So don't say that, right? Can you just go to the next one? Next, yeah, I think the rest of it was fairly fine. Okay, so now based on your physical exam and your, history, have you narrowed down to, any your differential diagnosis?
Yes, actually, that final diagnosis slide after this.
Yeah, go ahead.
Not there. So, 50-year-old postmenopausal lady with no comorbidities or significant past medical or surgical history is a case of right hypochondriac mass with obstructive jaundice, looking more of a malignant etiology as compared to non-malignant etiology, and most likely a gallbladder cancer as compared to other biliary tract or other secondary malignancies. It is not in colorectal.
So after your physical exam, when you've found a mass with OJ, which benign etiology will cause this?
So a large hepatic abscess or a tuberculosis are the only two.
TB liver, how many TB livers have you seen presenting with masses?
No, TB liver as in TB lymph node rather than TB liver causing.
Oh. So the abscesses I can understand, fair enough. Don't say TB. Doesn't make any sense.
Okay.
Yes, liver abscesses, I mean, in really untreated bad abscesses, sure, I will, give that to you, but not TB, right? Okay. And I mean, so malignant, you have said GB malignancy. What other malignancy can it be?
So First is so first differential was a gallbladder malignancy. Secondly,
Okay.
it could be a hepatic flexure malignancy which is locally advanced. Thirdly, it could be metastatic.
How
means-
often do you see a hepatic flexure malignancy presenting with jaundice?
So not that often. More if it's locally advanced, more so as a mass rather than an obstructive
Yes.
jaundice.
You know, I mean, there is no history of any altered bowel habits.
No,
There is no bleeding. So with jaundice, if it was just a right hepatic, like a right upper quadrant mass, yes, you know, I would agree with you. But with jaundice and likely obstructive jaundice, then it becomes a little less, na?
Yes.
So yeah, what else?
Then from the one second. Yes. Then from the other differentials, just a large hepatic mets or a metastatic cancer with abdominal lymphadenopathy were the ones.
Why? So this is the second time you mentioned abdominal lymphadenopathy. Is there any evidence for abdominal lymphadenopathy in this patient that makes you say metastatic cancers with abdominal lymphadenopathy?
No, sir. There were no other sites of
Yeah.
lymphadenopathy.
So in your physical or your history, there is nothing to suggest abdominal lymphadenopathy. Metastatic cancers with liver mets, yes, that which comes under your second point only,
Yes,
right?
yes.
So that I agree. A cholangiocarcinoma, I agree.
Yes.
We also see a lot of periampullary cancers.
Yes, sir.
So that is one thing because the obstructive jaundice is there.
Yes.
Why can or can it not be a periampullary cancer?
The presentation as a mass would be a very, very late
Yes,
finding.
correct,
Yes.
correct. Yeah, that about covers it. Okay. So, and you've rightly said that there is no evidence of cholangitis based
Yes.
on what?
So so patient does not have any fever.
Okay.
One. So the patient did not have any no fever, and so cholangitis is based on the clinical sign of it's called as a Raynaud's pentad. So jaundice is there, right hypochondriac. Pain is actually more of like a tenderness rather than a pain,
Okay.
and no fever, and yes.
So now that you've said Raynaud's pentad, what are the 5 components?
So Raynaud's pentad is Charcot's triad plus signs of sepsis. So Charcot's triad is right hypochondriac pain, jaundice, and fever, along with signs of sepsis. So yes.
Yeah. So mention the term only if you are sure that you're going to remember it in the exam as well.
Yes.
Otherwise, yes, what you said is correct. Okay. So how are you going to evaluate this patient?
So patient has to be evaluated firstly, investigations for fitness of the patient and investigations for diagnosis. So we'll need a complete blood investigation of the patient, especially the LFTs and coagulation parameters of this patient, because considering OJ, the patient will have to undergo some sort of biliary drainage or stenting. So LFT is also for to assess the hepatic reserve, CBCs, hemoglobin platelet count, and WBC count, whether the patient is in cholangitis or having infection or not. Tumor markers, but only as a baseline evaluation, not for diagnosis. CA and CA 19-9. A targeted USG liver is what would be needed.
A lot of people may not agree with the CA minute, so be careful when you say that.
Okay.
Most people would do a CA only when it comes to the colon, so maybe you would avoid that.
Okay.
Go on.
A contrast
sorry, Ananta, just one thing. I mean, unless and until, although very rarely will a colon cancer present with, liver metastasis, if that is your diagnosis or something, that is one can think of. Colon cancer, living with liver, jaundice, that kind of a thing. I was just thinking.
Yeah, ma'am. That's what I told him, that probably the colon thing should be way down on your differential, if at all. I think METs, yes, and the rest, GBC and cholangio, are fair calls. HCC, that. So colon, as madam is also saying, that keep it lower down on the list, if at all on the list.
Yes.
Okay. So you've done your blood work. Yes, you have found that there is a raised bili, some raised AST, and let's say a SAP of 1500.
Yes.
Okay. Other anything else other than the LFTs and CBC? What else did you say?
So then I went on to imaging, targeted liver and contrast enhanced CT scan of the abdomen and pelvis and thorax as well. and then stage whether if it's like radiological features of a gallbladder cancer or no, and whether it's resectable or no. A biopsy is not needed in all the patients if it can be completely surgically resected. If it's metastatic or locally advanced unresectable, then biopsy means before starting any sort of chemotherapy, or biopsy would be needed.
Okay. Also remember in your blood work to consider a coagulation profile as well.
Yes, I mean.
With that kind of jaundice, there is a chance that coags might be deranged.
Yes,
you might need to correct that before biopsy, or even if for drainage. Okay, just remember that.
Yes.
Okay.
Also, serum sodium is something I think that you need.
Yeah. And electrolytes.
Right. Yeah.
Yes.
Calcium will give you a level of, where how advanced the malignancy is, hypercalcemia ho sakta, you might need to correct. So yeah.
Also, Minit, for this patient like this, she has so much of, I mean, you said she has high colored urine, obstructive jaundice.
Yes,
do you think she's an early gallbladder cancer? I mean, even before your CT scan?
Ma'am, early gallbladder cancers are firstly very difficult to detect. More if it would be an incidental finding either on a pathological specimen and would go unnoticed, or maybe as a part of some other surgery. But then early gallbladder cancer as a jaundice would be very difficult.
Okay, so ma'am is directing you to a particular point here, Minit.
Okay.
Anything in a gallbladder which, even if it's an early cancer, can present with significant jaundice?
If it's near the neck or the cystic duct, causing early compression, then
yeah. Ma'am, is that what you wanted to know?
Yeah, and also the fact that I mean, barring that situation, generally, correct me if I'm wrong, that if a gallbladder, a cancer is presenting with jaundice, generally it would be an advanced gallbladder cancer, isn't that so?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, largely, I agree with you, ma'am. But neck cancers are notorious to present with OJ. Generally, when you have a GB with jaundice, there is likely some ductular involvement as well. The extrahepatic system. So it is likely to be more advanced than early. Okay, right. Correct. So do you have any of the investigations with you, Minit?
Yes, I have.
Yeah.
So the hemoglobin of the patient was 12, platelet 4,36,000, total counts of 11,900, creatinine of 0.62, albumin 3.87, ALP 273, bilirubin of 10, direct more than indirect, and AST/ALT 7895, INR was 0.9, CA was 34, and CA19-9 was 1,03,000. The UG liver was showing multiple calculi within and a large heteroechoic solid mass infiltrating the adjacent liver parenchyma arising from the fundus of the gallbladder. Porta is also infiltrated by the mass and result in bilobar, moderate central and peripheral IHBRD, biliary radical dilatation, no and no ascites. And we have the CT scan also of this patient.
Okay.
The CT scan is showing a 5.6 into 5.6 centimeter gallbladder neck mass infiltrating adjacent liver, extending superiorly to the confluence of the right and left hepatic duct and inferiorly up to proximal CBD. And we can also see that the right hepatic artery is also encased, so there is a locally advanced CA gallbladder, and we can see the liver infiltration and multiple calculi within.
It's quite a distended GB, and there is a lot of IHBR.
Yes.
Okay, so Minit, we have established that there is jaundice and it is obstructive jaundice.
Okay.
From an obstructive jaundice point of view, how are you going to evaluate and alleviate, this patient?
So as we've done a contrast enhanced CT and see a cholangio. So where is exactly the site of block is important, that we've come to know from either a cholangiogram or from a contrast enhanced CT. Basically, whether we need to do an endoscopic ERCP and stenting to relieve the obstruction, or we will need to do a percutaneous.
Okay, so you have the contrast enhanced CT with you, even if the images are not very clear here. Are you sure you're able to make out the level of the block from the contrast enhanced CT?
No, sir. It will need to be confirmed with a cholangiogram to know what exactly is the type and site of block.
So cholangiogram is invasive, a non-invasive method?
An MRCP would be one way of finding.
Yes. So a lot of people actually do an MRI with an MRCP to identify the type of block, although the gold standard is still a PTC gram, as you said.
Yes.
Right. Also, can you elaborate the types of blocks and what is the classification called?
Yes, so the Bismuth called it classification. So the type 1 block is when it's involving the common hepatic duct and not the confluence. Type 2 is when it involves the confluence of the right and left hepatic duct. Type 3A is when it involves the confluence plus the right hepatic duct. Type 3B is confluence plus left hepatic duct. Type 4 is when it's either multicentric or involving both, is multicentric or both the right and left hepatic ducts.
Okay. And what is this based on?
Mm,
What you said is perfect,
yes.
but what is this classification based on? And is it purely applicable for our patients?
I don't know, sir.
Yeah, so it was based for, benign strictures.
Okay.
Okay. So just remember that we have used it to, benign extrahepatic biliary strictures. We of course use it to classify the type of block as well. And generally, let's say for discussion's sake, this patient, how do you decide post PTC gram how to alleviate the kind of block?
Sorry, Anant, can I just, not for the part of case, but can you just, to simplify, can you just mention like beyond what level will you consider?
Yeah. So that's what I was asking him. He, I'll just see if I can, share my screen. I figured this is useful.
Do I stop sharing?
Yeah, just for a sec, maybe.
Yes.
Hang on. I just kept it open here. So is this thing visible?
Yes, sir. Yes,
yes,
sir.
Yes, ma'am. So I think the best way to explain is a diagram. So this was essentially used for the biliary strictures, post-op and all that, and we classified based on this. The green diagram on your right. So Minit, yeah. So how would you intervene? Let's say I'm telling you that this is a type 4 block. Okay, it is involving the confluence of both the confluence and both the right and left hepatic duct. So how will you reduce the jaundice?
So if it's not amenable to our percutaneous biliary, like stenting, if a stent is not being able to pass, then a biliary bypass would be needed. And such an extensive block will be...
No, I'm saying you type 4.
Okay.
I'm telling you type 4.
So then a biliary bypass would be...
yeah, you would basically need a PTPD, right? Percutaneous transhepatic drainage. Yes. So the dictum generally is that type 1 can be done via an ERCP.
Yes.
Type 3 and type 4 need a PTPD. Yes. Type 2 can be done by either. If you have a failed ERCP, yes, then you might need a PTPD. Yes. Now, for all of you who have done the GI postings, you would also find a terminology which is used only in TMH called non-communicating type 2. Okay, this is not used anywhere outside. So a non-communicating type 2 basically is like a type 2, but it also involves the roof between the right and left. So it behaves like a type 4 block, in which case, again, you will need a PTPD and that will not be resolvable by ERCP. Is that clear to everyone? That's a term you won't find outside. I don't know, it's just developed here and that's the way it is. So type 1, ERCP, type 2, both, type 3 and 4, PTPD, right? That's what I want you guys to remember, right? So it's a type 4 block and we've gone ahead and done a,
so can I just ask Anant for, if I don't remember, the numbers, so is it just that, if the block is above where your cystic duct joins the CBD, so if the block is above that, you can get ahead with an ERCP, and whereas if the block is below that, then, there's no way it can drain. And so that is why you need a PTPD. Is that correct?
Yes, the access with the ERCP is not possible, ma'am.
Yes.
Yeah, so that's what you're saying. Right. Like in the lower
can
block.
You show the diagram once again?
Just one sec, ma'am. Just 1 second.
Yeah, because I was...
Yeah, can you see it, ma'am?
Yes.
Yeah.
So that's
what... Assume your block is here somewhere, right?
Mm-hmm.
As compared to this one, where it's going right up to here,
Mm-hmm.
right? So when you're going from below to via an ERCP to access, these are not accessible, the higher blocks.
Right.
So,
Mm-hmm.
you cannot put a stent there. That's the, reason why you need that. Does that answer your question, Akhil? Oh, okay, right. So Akhil is also asking non-communicating type 2. Okay, great. So it's better explained by the type 1 here. And you have to use a three-dimensional idea. So you have a type 1 and a type 2 here, which is reaching the confluence. But three-dimensionally, this also has a roof here. Now, when it hits the roof also, it is a type 2 non-communicating. And that cannot be accessed or overcome via ERCP. Akhil, does that answer your question? I mean, I hope so. It's a very Tata term,
Yes, sir.
It's like a type 4 block. And that's what I remember. And that's the best way to explain, right? Okay. So, Minit. So, you do you know we've done a drainage, and what are the stents that you normally use, Minit?
Metallic stent and plastic stent.
Excellent. What is the lifespan of a metallic stent? What is the lifespan of a plastic stent? And when do you use which one?
Metallic stent is for 6 months. Plastic stent is for 3 to 4 months.
So generally, the plastic stent is correct. It's anywhere between 2 to 4 months. The metallic stents, 8 to 12 months also, they're pretty good. So definitely more than 6 months. Okay.
Yes.
And usually you use prior to surgery, let's say this was a periamp or a gallbladder, you would use a short SEMS or a plastic, because the metal stents cause more fibrosis, which may hinder surgery, right? Great. So we put a bilateral SEMS here. The patient's jaundice came down to 2.5. She's now okay, no fever. What next?
And since it's a locally advanced CA gallbladder and resectability is not feasible at this moment.
Why is it not feasible?
The right hepatic artery is encased, and vascular involvement and reconstruction is not feasible, especially the artery. Then we will have to go ahead with a neoadjuvant.
Okay. Can you give me some of the criteria that are commonly used or considered as unresectability criteria?
Yes, main portal vein involvement, which is not reconstructible, artery involvement, especially the right hepatic artery. Thirdly, nodal, when the lymph nodes cannot be cleared, especially the ones near the aortocaval basins and the celiac plexus.
Minute, aortocaval is metastatic. Okay. Aortocaval is not regional nodes. Yes. Yeah.
When the hepatic reserve of the patient is not good, an extensive en bloc resection would be needed.
Okay, so the easy way to remember it is one is tumor. If it's T4, largely it is unresectable.
Yes.
Right? If it is vascular, that is one of the hepatic arteries or portal involvement, then it is not feasible. These are the two common ones, right?
Yes.
Aortocaval node is technically metastatic node. So, okay.
Yes.
So, agreed with you that there are no aortocaval or para-aortic nodes, but there is vascular involvement, hence it is unresectable, right?
Yeah, so T4, as I understand, is liver bed involvement?
No, ma'am. No. So, it is... Sorry?
No, yeah. I thought they'll just elaborate
on
what was T4.
Adjacent organ involvement, let's say like a colonic or duodenal involvement, then it is a criteria for unresectability.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah, go on, Minute.
Yes, sir. So these are the...
Okay, so it's unresectable. Yes, and now you're fit for, the patient is now fit for further treatment. Yes, so what is your plan of treatment, assuming all factors considered, and what is your intent of treatment? And tell me what you will do.
So firstly, CA gallbladders locally advanced, those who present with jaundice, is not a good prognosis, firstly. since it is non-metastatic, we will go with a neoadjuvant intent with some hope of.
You just said it's unresectable, right?
It's unresectable. Okay. Okay. If it's unresectable, then it will be means we're still giving neoadjuvant.
Why? Why? You told me it's unresectable. So why are you giving neoadjuvant? So are you saying that when you give chemotherapy to a potentially unresectable tumor, you are going to downstage it to resection?
No, it doesn't happen.
That doesn't make sense, doesn't it?
No, that doesn't.
So yeah. So what are you going to do?
Gemcitabine based chemotherapy would be my first choice in this patient.
Okay.
Gemcitabine cisplatin or gemcitabine oxaliplatin for 4 cycles followed by reassessment.
Okay.
And, yes. Sir.
Okay. So how long would you continue this? I agree with both your options. How long would you continue this? And why?
Exact number of cycles.
अरे यार 10 साल से वो एक ही regimen we are using. So वो paper तो you have to know. ठीक है ना? So the strongest available data is for gemcitabine cisplatin, and they gave it for 24 weeks in the trial. Okay, 6 months, right? And then they stop. A lot of people continue, and there's some data for that. We also used to continue till some time back. So they stopped at 24 weeks. Okay. What is the data for gemcitabine oxaliplatin? Phase 3. Okay. There's a non-inferiority study from India. Okay, so you should know this, especially if your examiner is from AIIMS. Okay, Dr. Atul Sharma showed that both are equivalent regimens. Okay, so you can use either one. Okay.
Yes.
Now, and usually the answer is to stop at 24 weeks. Great. Okay. Anything that has come new beyond this over the last 6 months, 1 year? GemCis is right. Would you like to consider something new?
GemCis with albumin-bound paclitaxel, nab-paclitaxel could be tried if the patient is fit or...
Okay. Anything else? Agreed. I agree with you. Anything else?
If it's targeted therapies, since it's unresectable, then we should process for...
What are the known approved targets in gallbladder cancer?
One is HER2. Second
No. I knew you would say that because we are doing it. No. Okay. So the only one where you can consider is MSI because that is a pan-tumor agnostic. Okay, we are doing HER2 as part of a project. A lot of people would not agree with it, so don't say that.
Yes.
One of the possible targets in gallbladder is HER2, but otherwise not. Please don't say that in the exam, right? Anything else?
Tumor mutation burden and...
tumor mutation burden is almost, and someone else can correct me, is not an indication for any kind of immuno in approved guidelines unless Jai ma'am or Akhil, can you correct me? I don't know. It's not in biliary tract for sure or any of the GI cancers. There is a small line in NCCN for gastric cancers, but madam, you can correct me if it's,
Oh, I don't know, because most of us even, at least in gynec and breast, we still use either PD-L1 or MSI.
Yeah, TMB is still under, it is not a convincing biomarker yet. Anything else? One last chance. So you've now out of 20 marks, you've gotten 15, 16 marks. You're in, A grade now. One more and you'll get even better.
Actually, in the NCCN, what was mentioned for...
Not NCCN, no. Something within the last 3 weeks. Chalo. No. So durvalumab plus chemo. Okay, Topaz trial has just come out and it's positive. So GemCis plus durvalumab for 6 months, followed by durvalumab maintenance, has shown OS benefit. Okay.
So that is irrespective of PD-L1, Anand?
Yeah, ma'am. It's biomarker agnostic. They are looking at the analysis for PD-L1. So what we can see is that one, the gallbladders probably benefit less with durvalumab compared to cholangiocarcinomas. 2, there is some correlation with PD-L1. The greater the expression, the better the benefit. But the indication is across the board. as of now.
That reminds me, I think one of the questions was, tumor, in the theory was which drugs are either tumor agnostic or biomarker agnostic. So, I think.
Now we have.
Yeah.
So I think durvalumab has got that in now 2 indications. Even in lung, I think, irrespective of histology or PDL1, it is approved post CTRT, and now in biliary tract as well. So I think that was a good presentation, Minit.
Vijay has asked something about NTRK, I think.
Yeah. So other than MSI, now NTRK is also tumor agnostic. You have alitrectinib and larotrectinib in multiple tumors. The GI cancer with the maximum NTRK representation is colon. I think it's 0.8%. Biliary tract, I don't know. I know it's less than 0.5, but exact I don't know. So yeah. Thanks, Vijay. Minit, good presentation. I think that was very good. We can go to the next one. Madam.
Yeah, Darshit can.
Good morning, respected teachers and dear colleagues. Today, I'm presenting a short case. So, I'm presenting a case of a 48-year-old female housewife, resident of Kopargaon, Maharashtra. She presented with complaints of abdominal pain since 1 month, abdominal distension in 1 month, and loss of appetite since 1 month. The patient was apparently all right before 1 month. When she complained of abdominal pain, which was dull aching, stretching, and distributed over entire abdomen, with no associated aggravating or relieving factor. It was also associated with abdominal distension, which was gradual onset, progressively increasing over past 1 month, which was also associated with bilateral lowering swelling since last 10 to 15 days. She also complained of decreased appetite over past 1 month. There was no history of jaundice, hematemesis, or melena. There was no history of fever, loss of weight, prolonged cough, or hemoptysis. There was no history of orthopnea or decreased urine output or altered bowel habits. Moving on to past history, she did not have any comorbidities, no hypertension, diabetes, or any history of tuberculosis in past. In personal history, she did not have any addiction, no history of any major surgeries in the past, no history of alternate medications, and no history of any close contacts with tuberculosis. Moving on to obstetric and menstrual history, she was premenopausal. LMP was 15th of January. Since last few months, she has increased frequency of cycles. She was gravid 2, para 2, and no abortion. Both childs were normal vaginal delivery, and post second child, she had TL done. In moving on to family history, she had history of ovarian or uterine cancer in the mother, but the patient was not sure, and there was no documents available regarding same. So to summarize my case, she is a 48-year-old female with no comorbidities, presented with progressive distension of abdomen associated with dull aching and stretching abdominal pain, along with decreased appetite since 1 month, without any history of fever, weight loss, jaundice, melena, orthopnea, or altered bowel bladder. So from history, I will keep 2 differential diagnoses as the patient has ascites, and so first differential diagnosis will still be tuberculosis, and second differential diagnosis can be malignant ascites.
Sorry. Yes, Darshit, I think in this, the other history is fine. It's just that you will need to also tell about, in the short history, about the menstrual history, that she is premenopausal somewhere you have not written. I mean, I know you've written in that, but I think because this is a short history, so your summary should also contain that.
Yes, ma'am.
And okay, so what you said, malignant ascites. So what are your differential diagnoses in this, and how will you go about investigating? I think it's a short case, so we'll just quickly go through that.
Yes, ma'am. So she's a middle-aged lady. So differential diagnosis I will keep as a adnexal mass which is causing ascites. Other can be sub colon or a rectal lesion which can cause a malignant ascites. And but there is no history of the third possibility can be malignant ascites from primary like gallbladder and any GI primary. But as the patient did not have any history of jaundice and there was no history of any melena, so the GI primary in this case is less likely, ma'am.
Okay. So basically, you are thinking in terms of ovarian malignancy, you said, and any other premise. Anyways, I think one more point in your history, which would be relevant, and examination here would also be, breast examination and supraclavicular examination. Of course, this is a short case, but otherwise that would be relevant. And in a long case, if you have a lady with ascites, definitely a pelvic examination. Okay, so how would you go about investigating this patient?
Yes, ma'am.
Because I think whenever you get all these
yes,
patients,
ma'am. Coming to examination, ma'am. So in examination, she.
So you haven't said. Okay, sorry. Yeah, tell me.
Moving on to examination, she was ECOG performance 1. There was no pallor, icterus, cyanosis, or clubbing. There was no evidence of any lymphadenopathy. She had bilateral lower limb pitting edema present. Bilateral breast were normal. Cardiovascular, CNS, and respiratory examination was normal. On per abdomen inspection findings, there was generalized distension, and umbilicus was central and it was inverted. There was triad marks seen in the lower abdomen. There were no prominent veins or pulsation seen. On palpation, there was no mass palpable. On percussion, there was a fluid still was present, and auscultation vowel sounds were normal. Moving on to vaginal examination, 6 into 5 centimeter mass, fixed mass was felt to the posterior fornix.
No, one second. You felt a 6 centimeter.
Investigations in this patient.
No.
Hemoglobin was 11.2.
Darshit, can you just hold on and go to the investigations? Examination, please. Now, how did you feel a 6 centimeter mass through the posterior fornix? What did you do? You felt a 6 centimeter mass in the fornix. This was on per vaginal examination. How did you feel that 6 centimeter mass? In the fornix.
With the right hand, I compressed the from.
Hello.
From with left hand with two index finger and the middle finger, and right hand we compress the. Ma'am, am I audible, ma'am?
Yeah, you're audible. Tell me.
Ma'am, on compressing the pelvic.
Darshit, what madam is saying is
finger, per vaginal examination, and from right.
How did you get the length of a growth on a PV exam? Yeah, Darshit, that's what madam is asking.
Yeah, and you said which hand did you do the pelvic examination? So I think that is something that we need to check out on all the 3rd years whenever you are posted with us. I think, you need to do, because you said you put your right hand. Where did you put your right hand? In the pelvic examination?
Ma'am, with left finger, index finger, middle finger, and in the for pelvic examination, right upper right hand for compression, ma'am, of the pelvic ring to fill the mass, ma'am.
So I think that's completely, that shows that you've not done a pelvic examination for this patient. Yes, I think off the line we can do that in person, because you will, if you've done a pelvic examination with the right hand, your left hand will feel the mass. And then you can think, and there's no way that you can say the size of a mass on that pelvic examination, and you can just feel posterior. If you do a posterior fornix, you can feel a fullness there. The space isn't there for 6 centimeters to be there, So I think that clearly mentions that you've not done. So, this finding, if you say in the exam, it will show that it is pelvic examination has not been done. Okay. So I think one will need to go through it in one of the OPDs and then we'll show you. But this one is clearly that you need to say the clinical findings, whether the cervix was normal, what was your, you could feel a fullness on per-abdominal examination. What is your per-abdominal examination? You couldn't feel any mass. So if there is so much of ascites that you can't feel, then definitely you can't say the size of a mass on the PV examination, unless something is, even if something is, it's a large mass and you can feel per vaginally and then you can see it, in a way bimanually, even then the size is very difficult to say. So please do not say sizes on pelvic examination. Okay. Okay. Yeah, you can go on to the next. Yeah, Darshit, are you there?
To investigation.
Yeah.
Her hemoglobin was 11.
Yes, come on.
Hello. Ma'am, moving to investigations, her hemoglobin was 11.2, creat was 0.7, creatinine clearance was 100, albumin was 3.76, and bilirubin was 0.43. CEA was 1, and CA 125 was 1,888. CA 19.9 was 18.27.
So just pause there. So Darshit, whenever you're saying
CT,
examine, one second, Darshit.
Ill-defined mass enhancing
Darshit, can I just go back?
Darshit, slow down.
Yeah. So Darshit, whenever you are asked any investigation, I think before going on to the CT, whatever you've written there, I think you tell me that, whenever you define investigation, you have to define investigations for diagnosis, investigations for fitness. I mean, for this, a 48-year-old lady comes to you with ascites, okay, and you feel a POD mass, you would go ahead with the tumor markers that you just said. And I think, CA 125 and CEA are the standard. CA 99 we do, but the main two tumor markers are the CA 125 and the CEA. Just go back to your report. So in this patient, you said a CA. What ratio are you looking at? Is that ratio important, Darshit? Are you aware that there is a ratio between CA 125 to CEA? Darshit, are you there? So what is that ratio?
If you don't know it, it's okay. Say you don't know. Okay.
We can move on to the next. Okay, so basically why we do a CA 125 and CEA is because we also want to look at, because you said one of your differentials was a colon. So if the ratio is more than 25, CA 125 is to CEA, it is more suggestive of an ovarian malignancy. So is a CA 125 a diagnostic marker, or is it a prognostic marker, or is it specific? Is it sensitive?
Yeah, CA 125, in 80% of ovarian malignancies nearly it is elevated, but it is also elevated in other gynecological and non-gynecological conditions also, like in endometriosis, in pregnancy, or in adenomyosis, it can also be elevated, and other non-gynecological conditions like in case of colitis, ascites, or pancreatitis, it can also be elevated, ma'am.
Yes, so it is not specific is what you're trying to say, and can be raised in anything which irritates the peritoneum, be it, gallbladder or tuberculosis, or any peritoneal irritation can give rise to high CA 125. Okay. So instead of reading out the CT report, can you show the images, please? Darshit, you have the images?
So there are two arrows, ma'am. The right side.
No. First, tell me what is this?
This image.
I
This
can't.
is a the right arrow which is showing a lad
Darshit, that is not.
lesion, ma'am.
Darshit, hang on. That is not what Madam asked. Describe the scan from the beginning.
Right arrow.
No.
So you have to say this is a contrast CT of abdomen and pelvis, and then here the pelvic CT cuts are there. So you've done a contrast CT of the abdomen and pelvis, and these are the pelvic cuts, and then go on to say what it is showing. Okay. Yes, go ahead now.
Ma'am, this is a contrast CT of pelvis showing right side left side adnexal lesion, which is and aside is also with some omental deposits, ma'am.
No, the arrow on this side, what do you call on the right side, what is it showing? Is that the omental deposit or the pelvic mass?
Ma'am, the left arrow is showing the pelvic mass, ma'am. Along with that, there's ascites and some peritoneal deposits, ma'am. The right side arrow, ma'am.
Okay, I think it is difficult to discuss this. Okay, so in this way, do you have any abdominal cuts of this patient? Is this the only image, Darshit, or do you have any other images also? Okay, so if you don't have the other images, so how do you decide on? Okay, so this any other thing that you will do for diagnosis, because we would want to know how will you establish a diagnosis. Maybe you can move to another place. I think there's some background music that you have.
Yes, ma'am. So
I think Ravindra, your background music is there. I think somebody.
Music is always good, but not during a short case, I guess.
Yeah, that's a good this thing. Anyways, so how will you diagnose this patient? How will you? Okay, you've done a CT scan, you've done tumor markers. Anything else you would want for diagnosis, Darshit? Or a CA 125 is 2000, and this pelvic
so, ma'am, the patient had ascites.
So, what do you do every day for
yes,
diagnosis?
Yes, ma'am, tapping diagnostic and
diagnostic. Sorry, Darshit, we've lost connection. Are you there?
Diagnostic tapping was done, ma'am, which showed a high-grade serous ovarian carcinoma. But a prelim report is there, ma'am. Fine. Diagnostic.
Okay, 1 minute. 1 minute. In your exam, you will not have the. Yes, so Darshit, when we ask what else will you do for a diagnosis? Yes, you are audible, Darshit. I'm asking, and you have to slow down a little bit so that we are able to ask. And I think there is some time lag in the Zoom. So what I'm trying to ask, you are right. That, yes, so you need to do a therapeutic tapping. You need to do a diagnostic tapping because she has ascites. Okay. Hello. So will you need to do a biopsy for this patient, or a ascitic tap is sufficient, or do you do all patients need a biopsy? When will you want to do a biopsy for this patient is what I'm trying to ask you.
Yes, ma'am. So for this patient, ma'am, diagnostic aside tapping will be sufficient, ma'am, and we can have a histopathological report, cell block based on this patient. But if the patient is not having ascites, then in surgical staging, ma'am, if there are peritoneal deposits, or if there is then we can take peritoneal watching also, ma'am, during the surgical staging. The patient is not having ascites. But for this patient, ma'am, diagnostic tapping will suffice.
Okay, so the ascitic fluid suppose shows a lot of atypical cells, and a few of these cells show. Okay, I think we'll discuss the pathology next, and extensive mesothelial cells, and you don't have a diagnosis. In which case, will you want to go ahead for a biopsy if you're or okay, maybe I'm not clear. What I'm trying to ask you is that this lady has a pelvic mass and you have an ascites, and suppose the ascites shows adenocarcinoma. Is that sufficient for you, or are there situations where you think that you would want, a CA-125 is 1,800, you are at a peripheral center and you don't have the facility for a cell block? So is it sufficient, and somebody has is it sufficient to start treatment, or are there situations where you would definitely want to refer that patient and do a biopsy if that facility is not available?
I would prefer getting an IHC and to clear diagnosis, because sometimes pathological diagnosis is important, because if it is high grade serous or clear cell or transitional or any other, so for histopathological diagnosis, I'll confirm before starting treatment, ma'am.
Okay, so what I was trying to get at is that if you have a definite pelvic mass, your CA-125 is to CEA ratio is high, and ascites fluid is showing adenocarcinoma, that may be sufficient to start treatment. Of course, if you have the facility of a cell block, we will definitely do a cytology and a cell block. But if the facility for a cell block is not available, then that may be sufficient. Whereas if you have a situation where there is no, definite pelvic deposit, or no something like a primary peritoneal carcinoma, or you have bilateral ovarian masses, no ascites, in those kind of situation where we are thinking that the diagnosis could be a Krukenberg, that is somewhere maybe a biopsy is definitely indicated. Or say your CA-125 is to CEA ratio is low, your CA-125 is somewhere around 100, CEA 10. Of course, in those cases, you would also want to consider a scopy. So what I'm trying to get at is that you always do not need, of course, if you have a facility of a cell block, you definitely need a cell block or a biopsy to prove that. But if you do not have a cell block, a cytology with imaging findings and, the tumor markers may be sufficient to start treatment. Now that you've shown only CT pelvis, a CT abdomen and pelvis is what would be needed. So, okay, so supposing this patient has this tumor markers, which are what you've told, cytology showing adenocarcinoma. And of course, you've not shown the CT images, but this lady has a pelvic mass, and assuming this is an ovarian cancer diagnosis, how will you decide between upfront surgery and, neoadjuvant chemotherapy?
So, ma'am, if the R0 resection, that is the tumor post surgery, if it is not possible to have R0 resection that is less than 1 centimeter, then we consider it a neoadjuvant 3 cycles carboplatin, and then to reassess for surgery. If if R0 resection, that is the tumor, the post surgery, if it is less than 1 centimeter is possible to operate, then we can consider upfront surgery, ma'am.
Okay, so one is that in ovarian cancer, do you have any other terminology which we more commonly use instead of R0, R1? You've heard the term of optimal cytoreduction?
Yes, ma'am.
So how do you define optimal cytoreduction?
Ma'am, it is TAH, BSO, and omentectomy.
No. When I say optimal cytoreduction, I mean, you said that tumor size less than 1 centimeter. But, you know, when you say optimal, in today's day and age, it will be no residual tumor. Okay. So it is not less than 1 centimeter, right? So the other thing that I want to ask is that you said that, you know, I'm the surgeon and I say that I can achieve R0. Will you believe me? And will you, as a medical oncologist, your surgical colleague says that, yeah, I can operate this patient and I can get an R0 resection. So will you have some things in mind, even as a medical oncologist, to know whether this patient can possibly undergo a optimal cytoreduction or not? And how do you define that? Are there any criteria to know that? What features on the CT scan will you look to know that? Darshit, anything?
Yes.
Every day you're looking at scans, no? You make a joint clinic note. What are the things you need to see? Like they said that, you know, you mentioned for gallbladder, what is unresectable. So what are the things that you would see in a patient, which we will make you think of in terms of considering a neoadjuvant chemotherapy for this patient? Something? That is one out of one.
The patient has a large adnexal mass and
no, suppose, okay, so 1 minute. So I say a lady has a 20 centimeter mobile mass, no peritoneal deposits, mass is reaching up to umbilicus. Is this patient operable or is this not? No peritoneal deposit. So is that for 30 centimeter mass, is it inoperable? Is size a criteria for operability in ovarian cancers? Yeah, but Darshit, you have to say something. Yes, no, don't know, huh?
I don't know the exact criteria.
Okay, so size is not a criteria. The size of the ovarian mass is not a criteria for surgery in, you know, in ovarian cancers. You have 20, 30, 40 centimeter masses, and these may be mobile masses, and you can, you know, just go ahead and operate. And of course, if you have a 20 centimeter mass and there is no peritoneal or disease or ascites, don't puncture that mass, don't do a biopsy from that mass. That would go for, of course, upfront surgery if there is no other disease elsewhere. So in this patient, anything that you would think apart from, of course, you said size is not there, but what are the other criteria which will make you think?
Yes, ma'am. So other is the performance status, ma'am, and performance status, and if the nutrition status is also not good, ma'am, so then we can consider neoadjuvant therapy. Age is also a criteria, ma'am.
So you have to tell me tumor-related factors, patient-related factors. You are correct in saying patient-related factors are performance status, low albumin. These are factors which you would be patient-related factors. But what are the tumor-related factors?
Ma'am, if the tumor is, yes, ma'am. So if the tumor is like stage 4A in the pleural effusion is there, and if there is high tumor dissemination, ma'am. So then the two.
What is okay? Pleural effusion is fine, but what is high tumor dissemination? These are Darshit's criteria. We'll have to say. Okay, yeah. Tell me what you mean by you are right. You in saying tumor dissemination, but can you define tumor dissemination? What all sites will the tumor be where you cannot operate?
So, ma'am, if the tumor is adjacent to the bowel, it is if it is near the bowel in the mesentery, then it will be difficult.
So I give you two situations. There is a large pelvic mass. It is infiltrating into the sigmoid colon. I mean, it's abutting the sigmoid colon. And otherwise, there is minimal ascites. And this tumor is 5 centimeters in size. And also, of course, there is ascites. So is this, by your definition, can there be, is it operable or is it inoperable? Anything else? Because you said abutting the bowel. So what I'm trying to get at is just abutment of bowel is not inoperable, because you can do a bowel resection and do an end-to-end anastomosis. What makes it inoperable? You mentioned mesentery. So what makes it inoperable is route of mesentery involvement, because you can't resect out the route of mesentery because the whole of bowel will go. So route of mesenteric involvement, porta hepatic involvement, bowel involvement when you have extensive disease involving all the bowels. So just bowel abutment is not a criteria. So I think, those are the factors, liver parenchymal mets. So those are the factors which we will think of going ahead for neoadjuvant chemotherapy. So, you have these Levine's criteria. So please go back and look at the Levine's criteria for deciding between neoadjuvant chemotherapy or primary debulking surgery. Okay, I think we are already at 9:37. So basically, whenever you have these patients with ascites, first we need to know what is their diagnosis, and second, you will need to check once you've had this diagnosis as to whether you will be going ahead with primary debulking surgery or for neoadjuvant chemotherapy. I think those criteria have to be very clear, and with regards to patient-related factors, with regards to tumor-related factors. Okay, and I think that is something all of you should know that. Okay. Anyway, so going ahead, next, you said 2 chemotherapy regimen. Quickly, you tell me, and then we'll go to the histopathology. Yeah.
Ma'am, we'll give NICT 3 cycles of paclitaxel, and then we will reassess for surgery. And post-surgery, then we'll consider 3 more cycles of paclitaxel if the resection is optimal, ma'am.
And if resection is suboptimal, then will you change chemotherapy?
So, ma'am, if the disease, if there is R1 resection, ma'am, we can have if the patient is a hormone positive, we can give maintenance hormonal therapy if this resection is not optimal, ma'am, after adjuvant chemotherapy, ma'am.
We are not discussing here low-grade ovarian cancer. Your patient has high-grade ovarian cancer. The patient has response to 3 cycles of paclitaxel, but patient did not have R0 resection. Would you change chemotherapy in adjuvant setting or not?
No, ma'am. We will continue with the.
Then why you are, saying this, that if there is R0 resection, we'll continue 3 more cycles. Don't use such terms which will put you in trouble.
Okay, so do you have any option of changing? You're in the best of centers. This patient, of course, you do a primary cytoreduction. I give you another situation. You do a primary cytoreduction. This patient did not have optimal. You thought that you would achieve optimal cytoreduction. She did not achieve optimal cytoreduction. How will you, assess? The patient says that, okay, you can give me whatever the best is available. Anything that you might think of adding if she does not have an optimal cytoreduction, which has shown a survival benefit?
We can add bevacizumab, ma'am.
Yes. So when you, of course, this is in a neoadjuvant setting, no. But if in an if you don't achieve an optimal cytoreduction from the second cycle onward, that is a probability of adding that. And otherwise, how is optimal cytoreduction important? We talk a lot about that. Does it have any prognostic significance? Why do we talk about?
So, ma'am, the chances of recurrence are high as if the patient has not had optimal cytoreduction, ma'am, as compared to patients having optimal cytoreduction. Prognostic significance is there, ma'am.
Yes. So, it is of prognostic importance, and the most important prognostic factor for ovarian cancer, one of the most important, is achieving an optimal cytoreduction. Okay. Fine. So anything else that you would want, any test that you missed out in your investigation? And I think didn't ask you at that time, any other investigation that you missed out for this patient, and which is very important in today's day and age?
Ma'am, we for ovarian cancers, ma'am, we send them for genetic counseling. We test all patients of ovarian cancer for BRCA1 and BRCA2 testing, ma'am.
Yes, this patient also, her mother also had uterine cancer. So I think that is important. Okay, so I don't, so if she had BRCA1 germline mutation, anything else that you would want to consider?
Yes, ma'am. We can consider, ma'am, PARP inhibitors for maintenance therapy, ma'am. Post 6 cycles of total 6 cycles of paclitaxel, ma'am.
Does it have a PFS benefit or an OS benefit?
Yes, ma'am. PFS benefit is there, ma'am. 54 months of PFS benefit, ma'am. Olaparib, ma'am.
Okay. Okay, I think we'll need to, consider more, good Darshit, but I think you need to focus on, before we reach PAR, we need to focus on which patients, what surgery and all, how to take up a patient, what factors we need to do. So I think those basics are also important. So that I think we need to brush up those, for your exams. So otherwise, good. Okay, I think we just quickly move on to the pathology report. We just have 5 more minutes. Yeah.
Good morning, everybody. There's for the same patient. So she has undergone acidic fluid diagnostic acidic fluid tapping followed, and the cell block has been done, and the cell block shows fibrin, RBC, and abundant reactive mesothelial cells and few suspicious cells. And on immunohistochemistry, these atypical cells are positive for PAX8 and WT1, and P53 shows null mutant type staining. The acidic fluid cell block, the final report is suggestive of metastatic high-grade serous carcinoma. The WHO organization in 2020 have classified the epithelial type ovarian carcinoma into 5 types. That is the high-grade serous carcinoma, endometrial carcinoma, clear cell carcinoma, low-grade serous carcinoma, and mucinous carcinoma. So in case of
no, 1 second, Saik, just go back. So you have made what, a PPT out of the, okay, you present what you have, then I'll ask.
Okay, ma'am. So, madam, so I'm talking about only the high-grade serous carcinoma. It is in case of 70% of the patient, the site of origin is fallopian tube, and the precursor lesion is serous tubal intraepithelial carcinoma. And it is mostly associated with the hereditary syndrome, that is the BRCA1/2 associated hereditary breast and ovarian.
Okay, I think we have this.
Yeah, we should not be going through every part of it, Saik. I mean,
yeah.
Okay, ma'am.
So you have these 2 slides only, or anything else?
Yes, madam. I have this.
Okay, no, I don't need a PPT on the whole thing. Just go back to the first slide.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, so amongst this patient, how did you decide that this is, she was down below is written high grade serous carcinoma, and then that is ovarian carcinoma.
Yes,
so amongst this, which marker is suggestive of what?
So, madam, this the PAX8 and WT1. These are the PAX8 is mostly it is a marker for the Mullerian of the tumor. So it is suggestive of the high-grade serous carcinoma, and WT1 is differentiate between the endometrial and the ovarian carcinoma.
No. 1 second. So PAX8 is a Mullerian marker till that is correct. So PAX8 can be positive in any cancer of Mullerian origin.
Yes, madam.
And WT1 is suggestive of what? It does not differentiate between ovarian and endometrial. So what is WT1 suggestive of?
Madam, WT1 is it's also it is also found in the kidney in Mullerian tumors, and also it differentiates between it is mostly in there is a doubt between the ovarian and the endometrial type carcinoma, then we can able to.
So basically, it is a marker for serous tumors. Okay.
Yes.
So WT1 you can get in serous cancers as compared to non-serous. So that's where that serous bit comes from. And how do you know that this is high grade?
because due to the P53.
Okay. So here it is written P53 null mutant. So what do you understand by that? When you call a P53 mutation, I mean on IHC, it's written null mutant. Sometimes it is written it is diffusely positive and mutant.
Yes, madam. Yes, madam.
इसमें नहीं है.
Madam, if it is a diffuse staining in at least 80% of the cells, then it is overexpression. If it is no expression, it is null. And also it is sometimes shows, but I cannot understand between that it is null. There is no expression. It is.
So basically either both are mutant. If it is diffusely positive, that is more than 80%, that is mutant. Or if there is no staining, then even that is the null mutation, that is also considered as mutant. So just
Okay,
P53 expression, because many a times you see from outside report that it's 30-40% expression. So P53 expression per se should not be considered as mutation. So only if it is very diffusely and extensively positive, that is when you would consider it as a mutant.
Sayak, in your slides, you have written it also, yeah?
Yes, madam.
You've written the same thing.
Yes, sir.
वो तो पढ़ लेते.
I know you made a slide, but I don't think you read the slide. Yeah, Seema, you were saying something, sorry. Seema, you're there, sorry, you were saying something here.
No, I was not saying anything.
Okay, so I think whenever you're looking at, they have done these markers. Sayak, go back to your slide.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so if I tell you that, CA 125 was 100 and CEA was 5, any other marker you would want your cytologist to put?
CA 125 is 5 and C and
So I said CA 125 is 100 and CEA is 10.
Okay. Then we can do the CK7 and CK20.
Which will be positive where?
CK7 will be positive in the ovarian and CK20 will be in the colorectal origin tumor.
Okay, sure. So I think this patient, there was no doubt. So they had done this. So can you tell the grade of the tumor? Definitely. Of course, P53 is 1. But on a cell block, I mean, apart from P50, if you don't have this, can you tell the grade of the tumor on the cell block, or grade is better defined on a biopsy?
Madam, grade is dependent on the biopsy, madam.
Yes, because you can't tell the grade on cell block. Yes. Okay. Okay, sorry. If anything else anyone has to ask.
Yeah. I think that was a good interpretation, other than the fact that you didn't read your own info. Yes. Please. Apna to pad lo, yaar.
Yeah, I think, and also if you have presented this, I think you're supposed to stop at this and let us ask questions.
Yes,
and second is, whenever you present any pathology report, in any, I mean, this is of course an in-house thing, you're supposed to de-identify that report, right? So that is something I think if people forget to do any CT scan report or a pathology report, ideally those should be de-identified. Yeah, okay.
Yes, madam. Sure, madam.
Okay. Thank you. I think that
should be done. Yeah. Okay. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.